Good.
Well, that's the one thing that the anarchist intellectual slob movement actually did well. They fucked up a lot of things, but espresso in the cafe culture, they did good.
So I wanted to ask you, like, remember I asked you before what you make of all this Gusera and the Sarah, like, or Q. You think it's like I was thinking about you this morning, like if it's just part of the whole psyops, like the Hegelian strategy, it would kind of make sense, and they would just harvest a lot of human energy and emotion by getting people thinking there's a hero in this drama. But I love your
Yeah.
approach to looking at these things. That
I mean, the occult thing helps a lot. I mean, a lot of people underestimate the causal nature of these occult mystery sects.
absolutely no, I
Mostly,
love that about you, what you've
yeah.
done. Yeah.
Everything seems to you can explain a lot more reasonably when you take those into consideration, especially the Crowley esoteric section of the Theosophical movement. If you take those networks together and look at how they evolved throughout the 20th century and the institutions and ideological structures they brought into being, it accounts for a lot of the things like QAnon and the earlier anonymous movements that grew out of the whole Wachowski brothers operation out of Hollywood.
All
Um,
right. What about the Wachowski brothers, sisters?
Sisters, whatever they are.
Do you like,
Oh,
I mean, where did they get the Matrix narrative? Where do you think that was?
they're synthetic cardboard cutouts. They're like Bill Gates or Elon Musk. There's nothing there. They're just
Oh, I see. They're cut
yeah.
out.
They're
Yeah.
it's they it's that like these are Gnostic uh stories tweaked for a transhumanist like age.
Yeah.
And the way I see it is like these are partially to entertain the masses, but partially to groom the elites that will be part of the Silicon Valley transhumanist Peter Thiel sort of network that exit the matrix, but then enter their own new matrix that they don't even realize. They like that's why Elon Musk and Peter Thiel all believe that they're living in a computer simulation.
Oh,
They
It's
I,
don't
game
believe in
B.
reality.
oh,
It's
totally.
Matrix is game B.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's Game B. If
No,
you haven't
it's,
looked into Game B, Mark, you got to look into Game B.
I've
Cynthia
heard of
could
Game
explain.
B, but
Yeah,
what I thought I'd like to talk about because I come at this in the art of war. I've got my roots are in Catholicism, and I'm 31 years after feeling not called to monastic life in Jerusalem, and when I felt the calling, literally in the old city, and instead of going into religious life, feeling like Jesus was saying, "Who do you think killed me?" I'm like, "Oh, the money changers killed you, didn't they?" Right, and so that was my calling into like re-enter the temple of economics and build a civilization of love. It's like, okay, that's a tall order. And then coming back home, I was called somehow. I thought, oh, I think I'm going to marry Jennifer, who we were barely dating. And 6 months later, we got married and been married ever since. So this weird sort of feeling that how do we create conditions in which we upend, right? And we restore the covenant relationship we have with God, and we restore this kind of understanding of money, and that led me deeper into the understanding of evil, structure of evil, structure. So I come at it from a kind of a spiritual, not so much warfare, but a strategy which says, given, and I've been praying, say, reveal to me, God, the chess moves of your enemy, and bring to me understanding of how they operate. And so then I meet you, or I listen to you, and I don't remember how I got onto listening to Matt, but and then you, Cynthia. So I look at it as like in the art of war, what if we have this power within us to basically manifest and to pray into the matrix, to basically nullify every chess move they try to make. And they're essentially impotent. And I've studied the demonic and I studied Freemasonry. And basically, if you understand the demonic, they're highly legalistic. So they're kind of on a short leash. And if you understand that, you know that we have more power. We have the power of love, which absolutely eclipses all these narcissists and sociopaths. But most of us just are not willing to exercise that authority or even think about what are we going to pray for today. That right? Because you've analyzed everything that you totally agree. They're occultists. They're infused with Satan and these evil. The demonic feed on emotion. That's the other thing to understand is like they absolutely feed on fear and all these negative emotions. So when you understand all that, the question is, what are we what are we doing today, right, to create the conditions for, I guess, a new economy that, whether it's Lyndon LaRouche or what you're talking about, or the other possibility is it's all about timing. Like this is that's the other thing that comes to me is like, is this the time? Like when COVID hit, I knew when 9/11 hit, I knew it was an inside job. It was like, it was obvious to me.
Mhm.
And yet these things seem to still have to unravel and manifest, as if this is part of a bigger strategy and maybe a 2,000-year strategy of coming to this inflection point we're at now. Anyways, that's my, and
Yeah,
I don't say this publicly often because I just don't need to, because
right. Cynthia, you want me to jump into it, or you want
Yeah, you start.
to? All right, yeah. I mean, I'll based on your considerations that you've thrown out there, I'll just sort of take the ball and lend a
yeah,
few of my own
I
thoughts
just popped up
with
a
it.
fly ball, so I know you get
Yeah, yeah, that was a well, yeah. So I'll try to hit it back to you and or Cynthia. Definitely, taking the long game approach is really important, and a lot of people underestimate the influence of these deeper, subtle structures, sort of the long waves.
Yeah,
We're,
yeah.
we're very used to being slapped in the face with events temporally, and it causes too many people, I think, and that has a lot to do with the type of education system and culture we were born into, being that we already had a very captured society that was pretty advanced in a state of imperial decay when all three of us were born. It
Right.
was already in a state of decline. So that's going to manifest in every aspect of life, right? And the education system is going to be reflected by the type of structures of thought management that those who wish to control and herd society would approve of. And there's certain types of thoughts that are not permissible, um, of which one of those is the appreciation of the power of ideas pertaining to principles of reality, right? The nature of God, of soul, of human nature, of these big questions, justice,
Yeah.
and the ideas that ideas themselves don't have weight. You can't see them. They're not bounded in time or space, but they shape everything because human beings trying to understand them will have their identities, whether it's 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 10,000 years in the past or a million years in the future.
Mhm.
We are the creature that tries to strive for understanding these principles, and then we act accordingly. It shapes our identities. We start building institutions according to what our idea of those things are as ideals, what should be. The big S should. And there's not always an agreement. Some people, they take one hypothesis that were made in the image of a living, loving, reasonable creator, and thus shape their conscience and their maturation of their minds in accordance with that. And you could see that in a lot of the writings of Cicero and Plato and many of the ancients. But
Right.
then opposingly, you've got the schools of the sophists that Plato was battling, that have a different set of logical leaps that they make,
Yeah.
which presume that no human beings are God, or there is no God, or whatever, and that if there is no God, all there is left is just will to power, like
Right.
Callicles or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then they create their own institutions that are incompatible with the what I believe is more natural, and what Cynthia and I we talk about the sort of thing a lot is natural law. So you've
Yes.
got
I do
these
too.
opposing
Yeah.
schools of thought shaping history, and things that happened 2,000 years or 3,000 years in the past often have more impact on what's shaping our current life than things that happened 2 days ago. So yeah, definitely, that's my consideration based on what you were saying about things 2,000 years ago affecting to the present, for good or for bad. You've got bad ideas that take long waves into consideration, and very good ideas. So yeah, that's my little contribution. That's my 2 cents, my 2 kopecks.
I love it. So I want to throw that. I'll volley back my pickleball at Cynthia, and because I'm very interested in your inquiry into Operation Gladio, and I have this weird connection to that story, and so does Edmonton. I don't know if you realize, but um, Roberto Calvi, 1986, I was very close to working for the Cormy Financial Family Enterprise here in Edmonton.
Mm.
And Donald Cormy he owned a ranch just west Edmonton. And guess who was co-owned by?
Corby,
Calvi.
Roberto Corby, Calvi. That's the P2
So,
Lodge guy, right?
yeah. So
Okay.
so have you ever read In God's Name? I said, no. It's by, he said, it's about the murder of John Paul the First. It was
Mm.
speculative. And I said, tell me more. I said, well, there's a connection between this Roberto Calvi, God's banker. And then I realized, oh, that's all God for the part three. And isn't it interesting? It's got connections to Edmonton. I said, well, she said, as a young lawyer, she was sent to Brussels and London and Rome to investigate this story that Calvi, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and she said, I've never been so scared in my life. I saw things, and I went to that bridge, and I realized they murdered him. And I
Hmm.
personally went to the bridge. I went to London in 2014 because we were literally praying into the square mile. This colleague of mine in Calgary, and I said, "Are you sure this is an act of spiritual war? We're going to pray into the matrix." And he goes, "I know." I said, "You go first." And so I'm getting some opposition. I said, "Well, who are you praying for?" He says, "I'm praying for the Rothschilds." I'm like, anyways, turns out, long story short, we make contact with this fellow, Peter West, who's a very ethical Christian former banker. Because we said we got to find someone who works inside the corporation at least during the day. So suddenly Peter's inviting me to uh, to an event at the House of Lords where I meet Lady Penny Money Coots. Like, what? And I know that Calvi was murdered. So I go to the Blackfriar Bridge at the scene of the crime, which is at the entrance to the Corporation of London. And I get invited. Peter takes me into the St. Lawrence Jury, and he shows me where the stones are, where the Roman Colosseum stood. We had Guildhall. We're on the stage of Gog and Magog, these effigies. I'm like, oh my God, this is the darkest place on the planet, no question. And I just feel like I got to pray. I got to pray over this thing. As I did, I was commanded in 2006 in Beijing, pray over China. I was senior advisor to China for 3 years, up to Hu Jintao. And so that's part of my this crazy story and so it connects to the Operation Gladio, which I find intriguing because you're deeper inquiring. It's like, wait a minute, how did the Vatican get involved, entangled in all this mess when the church, if it knew its authority over, what I'm talking about, evil, kind of blinked and went to bed with the five eyes and the right, got into the heroin trade and ignored the warnings of Mary at Fatima in 1917. When she said in Fatima, Russia is going to go communist and there will be a war. And she said, unless you consecrate Russia, it's going to cause shipwreck. And then to understand that if the idea of communism was birthed out of London, we got a bloody big problem, Houston. And the church, and as a Catholic, and I bug my like I've written the Pope directly. It's like, help me be your Francis, come on. Like, what are you doing? So this is how I view the world. And I think what a paradox that this thing comes out of London,
Hmm.
destroys the Orthodox monarchy of the czars. And now how bizarre that we have Putin and Xi that could actually be the salvation of this crazy plot. Like, I think that's so cool.
Yeah, that's quite the opening to a discussion. Well, I the way I view it, and like you were mentioning in the email, I'm not, going to be as thoroughly aware of Catholic history. However, there are huge events in history that affected everybody.
Yeah.
And so that's how I kind of look at it. And I feel that the rift, one really big rift that started to affect the integrity of the Vatican was when there was that break with the Eastern Orthodox,
Yep.
church formed their own thing. And Matt was just bringing up the point today that that actually happened right before the Norman invasions, which a lot of historians, they view that as the real first Crusades. And
Mm-hmm.
so there probably was a disagreement amongst the church members as to what direction they were going to take things. Kind of similar, to it happens all of the time, in terms of these institutions that have a lot of responsibility. It makes a lot of sense that that would have played a huge role. I'm not saying it's the only role, but that would have played a huge role for people to have left. And the Crusades were a really, not a good move. And at the time,
No,
Europe,
they're
at
terrible
the
move. Like,
no, and like the thing too that's so unfortunate is that uh Europe had a lot of the Islamic Renaissance, right? Europe was heavily affected by the Islamic Renaissance, including Spain and Sicily were like major hubs of the golden Renaissance age
yes.
of
What,
Islam.
that's
Yeah, and it
true.
has like a lot of positive relationships actually with Christianity. So Spain, even though it was under the Islamic Caliphate, it had a lot of ecumenicism, and so there were Jewish scholars, there were Christian scholars. Like you didn't have to be Muslim to live in Spain, and
Mm-hmm.
there were several of these House of Wisdoms, right? So Baghdad is like probably the most famous House of Wisdom, but you had House of Wisdoms all over the place, including in Al-Andalus, which was the southern part of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And Sicily also plays a big role in this as well. And so I think that there were unfortunately bad apples within the Vatican. There was always a fight. I feel like not every pope, like there were popes that were against this kind of Gladio direction. Crusader, the Gladio and Crusaders are totally Gladio is a continuation of the Crusades,
Oh, okay.
and so you had popes who were fighting against this and understood that, the power of the church didn't rely upon you needing to enforce your will, physically onto other religions. But if there was a shared understanding, this could flourish into I guess a city of God, kind of St. Augustine's words. You look at
Mm-hmm.
Syria, for instance, as a really good example of how you can have different religions coexist for centuries peacefully, and there's a dialogue between the church, the Christian churches, and the Muslim synagogues, or I'm not quite sure what you call them, and the Jewish synagogue. So this, I feel, is a good direction that we could have gone, and there were many people within the Vatican who wanted that kind of direction. And the Crusades basically was like, hitting the chessboard over kind of thing, because if things were allowed to continue without massive war, there would have been, I believe, we naturally want to have dialogue, and we naturally want to share knowledge when we're
True.
not feeling threatened, right? we
Right.
just
Right.
we just want to have a love of wisdom. That's the best thing, is when you want to learn, but it's guided through love of
And
wisdom.
I think epitomized by Saint Francis and Clare, right? I mean, in Assisi. I mean, it's paradoxical that he gets injured, right? He would have gone to the Crusades, but and that's what would have been the second Crusades, I think. But
Mhm.
de Bouillon before that, yeah,
Well, that
And
would have
then
been the fourth
or the
crusade, probably.
fourth
Oh,
Crusade, yeah.
yeah, the fourth crusade. Yeah.
But
Okay.
Frederick II plays a really big role in this. So he's the emperor of Rome and has a whole bunch of other titles. And at the time you had the Papal States in Italy. So the Papal States had their own military, and they were Frederick was born in Sicily, so he grew up speaking Arabic, and that was actually really normal back in the day. Like in Spain too, you had when the Christian kings came into Spain, they were speaking Arabic. That was their primary language. And that wasn't considered a threat to Christianity. So Frederick II, who was a Christian, was still very familiar with the, Islam and the Arabic culture and all of this, and there was pressure for him to start the Crusades, right? Even though technically they had already started with the Norman invasion of Sicily that occurred about 100 years before he was born into Sicily. But by
Oh,
then, Sicily was, yeah, recovering.
that's a critical piece. Yeah.
Yeah, so Frederick II already understood the negative push from certain groupings within the Vatican on this. And so he's known for going down to Jerusalem, and his crusades was talking to people and saying like, hey, do you want to just like say that, we have a certain kind of, claim or whatever here? It's like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. It wasn't really the war. And when Frederick II returned back to Italy, when he was he is forced to go down there and do this to just kind of appease the. I think at that time there were two popes. See, that I don't know the history so well to know this sort of thing, but anyway, the papal states were waiting with their army and he had to fight them. So they were not happy with how he handled himself in Jerusalem. So you have like
Is
these
this
kinds of dynamics.
was this the first crusade de Bouillon?
Yeah, yes, I believe that this is regarded as the first Crusades, and so they actually wanted to go to war with him and forcefully remove him, and he did. He was able to win that, but he did die at a relatively young age, not too young, but still on the young side. That I suspect probably foul play, but he was a really really positive character for
Interesting.
the Roman Empire
What
and trying to change the Crusades. But on a quick note too, that's what has birthed the Mafia Brotherhood. As you're talking about Roberto Calvi, like why was the Mafia so intertwined with the Vatican? The Mafia Brotherhood started in Spain. And the Benedictine order, they created a lot of the militant crusader orders, right? So the Templars, the
right.
Hospitallers, there's
Jesuits
other.
later. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there were other ones in Spain. I forgot the name of them, and they were connected to the sister.
Assertion.
Yeah,
Cistercian.
yeah. So the Benedictines were responsible for those militant crusader orders, but they were also tied to the a formation of the Mafia Brotherhood, and the first Mafia Brotherhood that we can account for from the work of, I don't know if his book is here. Yeah, I have it. Leon Chandler, Brothers in Blood. That's actually a
Oh,
really good
cool.
book.
Wow.
And and this is actually overlapping the life of Cervantes. But the first Mafia Brotherhood is in Spain, and who do they work for right away? The Spanish Inquisition. So they used to be,
Mm.
bandits, but all of the power that they were given, so that they like took over. What's the name of that place that there's in Seville in
Seville, yeah.
Spain? That became notorious, and that's why there were operas written about it and all of this, because
Oh,
that's where the Spanish Mafia Brotherhood first had their like domain that was handed to them for their service in the Spanish Inquisition. So,
and they had the art of
whatever,
interrogation. Yeah.
yeah, whatever they became what they, as a large influential force, became that way from their service for the Spanish Inquisition and the church. And they were taught basically the same kinds of rituals and initiation processes that had already existed with the Benedictine order. They already had the Grand Master, system that was
Mm.
also taught to the Mafia Brotherhoods in their own kind of branding. Then there's evidence again from Leon Chandler's work that was what went into Naples in Italy, and then that's what went into Palermo.
Mm.
But it's a direct line of a continuation of the initiatory and the ritualistic and the codes and all of this. It's tied to the Benedictine teachings of a militant order. But they were going to provide a different kind of service, but they were all working together. So it actually makes a lot of sense that the mafia would be the servants to this grouping within the Vatican so clearly later on with Roberto Calvi.
Wow.
Mm,
And does
amazing.
this also lead into or tie into the, as you were referencing the Norman conquest of southern Italy that was happening around the same time as the Norman conquest of England? So
Well,
you
I
had
was
the
going to say, I was going to ask that too, the connection with William the Conqueror, who was apparently half Viking,
oh yeah.
right? And he would probably not have won if hadn't his Viking brother being fighting on two fronts. So
Hmm.
um, that's what I learned at Windsor Castle in 2021.
Hmm. Well, Norman, that's Northmen, right? The Northmen are the Vikings.
The
That's
Northmen,
Mhm.
yeah, the
Yeah,
Northmen, yeah,
and they're trying to popularize that now in the Netflix movies and so forth. We're supposed to
right,
romanticize that because again, this is the other side of the warfare that's going on right now, but they're all working towards the same goal is the creation myths. And so that's what they did to the Germans too, right? That's how the Germans got
yes,
sucked into something that became extremely radicalized, was that they weaponized their creation myths. And so the German people felt that, you know, the whole blood and soil thing is again a weaponized form of taking people's creation myths from their cultures and making it into something that becomes, you know, you need to have a kind of cleanse, a cataclysmic event, you know, these sorts of things in order to wipe out the impurities,
yeah.
which is what is attacking your own people. And they're just
mhm, mhm.
repeating that theme everywhere. That's why the ghost dance, which is something I've been
Yeah,
studying in the
that
United
was
States,
amazing because I loved your take on the ghost dance, and I work with First Nations, so it's like that is pretty.
yeah, the Native Americans were told, and it's well documented enough that you can trace it from Pontiac with the Jesuits, back up until the late 1890, the massacre at Wounded Knee. But Tecumseh is also involved in this story. His brother was a prophet that also spread the prophecy, and part of the prophecy was telling them that you would be invincible in battle. So it encouraged over and over again for these Native American war tribes to just rush into battle blindly, thinking they were going to have supernatural strength. And of course, they were not invincible to the white man's bullets, and they were massacred.
Right.
Um, I guess, you know, guess who that was in service to? Certainly not the Native Americans. And
Yeah.
even to this day, there are people who are trying to promote this as some kind of romantic thing, as if it did anything good. Um, but yeah, the Smithsonian anthropologists were involved in this. It's very, very ugly. So that's another aspect that people have to be aware of in terms of
Well,
this
you
kind of
pointed out in your recent essay as well that the Smithsonian logo itself is the Jesuit logo. Like if you actually look at
thing.
the 16 pointed sun,
I know it's
it's entirely that, right? Eh,
well, you
Yeah.
burst my romantic bubble of the Benedictine rules because I used to teach corporate business ethics at the school at the U of A here, and I always like my second class was virtue, right? And I throw up the Benedictine rules, which I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. At least there's some rules of good conduct that
yeah.
otherwise we
Well,
have no business ethics whatsoever.
well, the thing I would just toss out there quickly on that note, just as a side note, in researching the rebranding of a lot of these mystery schools that were trying to see themselves into the early Christian faith, and there was a big battle, and like Saint Irenaeus of Lyons has a lot of diet like he called out very very eloquently and rigorously the nature of these different heretical agencies that were actually Mithraic, they were ISIS in their essence, but they were rebranding themselves in a Christian garb to try to subvert Christianity from within, bringing in cannibalism, utilizing
Right.
all sorts of like magical tricks and stuff to induce people into superstition. So he called it all out, and they got taken down around the end of the 5th century, but they rebranded themselves. And the thing that all of these esoteric schools do is they have an exoteric and an
Yeah.
esoteric teaching structure. And the same thing that I could see with when they seeded the Benedictines in the early 6th century,
6th century.
they,
Yeah.
they had like an outward, because I know a lot of good Benedictines, just as I know a lot of good Dominicans and good
I
there's
like
some good
some good
Jesuits that I've seen
Jesuits.
out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
and they will never say, they can't say publicly what the higher priests, the higher initiates believe internally, because that, if people knew what they actually believe, they would
So,
be disgusted. So
so I want
the Benedict's order is not a bad thing necessarily when you just read it out loud, like, as far as like being stoic, being loving, being dutiful, all these like good things are not bad unto themselves. That's all fine. But then there is this inner core where they can extract from their monastic groupings within the either the holy virgins around Scholastica, his
yeah,
twin
yeah,
sister,
yeah.
or his own groupings, that are brought into the higher, opposite game when they move ahead. So that's part of the thing that you see with the Templars. You see that with all the way through the Jesuits, through different Masonic agencies, these two outward and inward
Right.
belief structures.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to too, because in this understanding of a spiritual war, if you like, is you see the infiltration of the church by Freemasonry, like certainly since Vatican II. If you ever read Malachi Martin's work, like his last book, Windswept House, right? Brilliant. Like he just basically he describes the sacrifice of innocence, right? Of child sacrifice. I had a girlfriend here once, like when I was 26 in Edmonton, who was, she started to get recall of, rituals, sexual abuse by her, Mormon
Oh,
fathers, and taken to literally child sacrifice ceremonies where she's having recall as we're dating, as her soul is reconnecting with her body because she would just leave her body, right? I'm like,
wow.
holy shit. And then she's like, tried to go to the police and they never believed her. And I'm like, I believe you. Like, this is messed up, man. But this is like so dark and luciferic. I don't even know, like, at some level, it's just impossible. But now with all the stuff coming out, now her story makes sense, right? And so, like, so you see the infiltration, and I've studied, even my dad, who was, got supposedly a 33rd degree Mason, like, I had to personally, I was told, you need to unwind every oath that your dad took because it's vibrating in your DNA. And it's not just one generation, right? So this is really messed up. And of course, all those levels are occluded from, right? You don't know what you're going to give your oath to until you go to the 33rd degree ceremony in Washington, and suddenly you're with these ex-presidents who are all like giving their life to who, right? And it's like it's so insane. And yet it's all right, that's the way the structure of evil works. And so it makes sense that when I look at, supposedly the Jesuits said that they should never have a pope who's a Jesuit.
Hmm.
Yet here we are, right? So as soon as Benedict was taken off, I was like, that's it. They're gonna, this is it. This is gonna be the last pope. And so
Part of
yeah. Anyways, that's
Mhm. I just wanted to quickly add to what you were saying that was what Gladio was doing as well, was it wasn't he was using the excuse of fighting communism as a way to actually purge its own church members.
right,
So
right.
it's crazy that the whole "are you a communist" kind of thing
Yeah,
went even into the church. So people within the church were being accused of being communists because how dare you read the communist works and try to understand where their thinking is and have a dialogue, which is, in my opinion, what you should always be doing as a Christian, is having a
yes.
dialogue. It doesn't
Dialogue.
mean that you're advocating anything. And there were church members who were saying, because obviously the better aspects of communism were at least, criticizing imperialism, which is something that you should be criticizing. And
Mm-hmm.
so the better church members were saying, like, well, we should be addressing these concerns. And so these people were starting to be attacked as communists. And South
Mm-hmm.
and Central and South America, of course, mostly Catholic population. Gladio was brought into South America after being fine-tuned, in Europe and Vietnam. Vietnam was a huge laboratory for Gladio type Orwellian societal experimentation. They brought it into Central and South America as Operation Condor. That is
Yeah,
Gladio.
yeah, right.
And they not only attacked, sovereign nation states, but they were attacking church members in Central and South America. And there was again a bit of a I feel a trap for some of these better members where they were told to just like fight with the communists sometimes.
I
Or
know.
I mean, communists, for me, communists in Central and South America are not really the same as anywhere else because they were still often Christian, right? And you don't
Yeah.
usually get that in other parts of the world, but a lot of the communists in Central and South America were actually still identifying as Christian. That's how Christian Central and South America is. But
Liberation theology, right? I mean,
exactly, liberation theology. And I feel that it was a bit of a trap for these better members to
mhm.
implicate. I'm not saying don't ever fight for something or that you don't ever need to fight for something, but I think it was done in a way where you were definitely going to, it was like a suicide run. And then on top of that, there were excuses made to
Mm.
just put Jesuits, even not just like Catholics, any kind of Catholic, including Jesuits who were standing up to this. So the better Jesuits were being put into these interrogation prison centers. Like in Argentina, that was the biggest one that was notorious for
Mhm.
a lot of executions, but also terrible forms of torture, like really off the
Yeah,
charts. Like they
yeah.
threw babies against the
Oh,
wall
geez.
in front of the parents to, just make people totally break down. And the the present Pope
Yeah.
worked in Argentina during this time, and
Bergoglio. Yeah.
That's right, Bergoglio. Like,
so not a big surprise, like they basically had a military, coup of the better Catholic members, in my opinion. And there was a story, I forgot now the name of them, but there were two Jesuits who were sent to the Argentinian interrogation center, and they were not supposed to make it out, but somehow they were dumped in the middle of the forest after being tortured for like a week or more, half clothed, and then they finally made it back to civilization. And what's Pope Francis's name before he became Pope again?
Bergoglio.
Bergoglio.
Archbishop.
Bergoglio said, "Oh, you guys, thank God you made it out safe." And they're like, "No, no, no, you sent us there." And he's like, "No, no, no, I'm the one who got you out." And they're like, "No,
No, you
you
messed
sent
up
us there."
puppy. You sent it. No, it's so insane.
Yeah. But that's the interesting thing with this, like control the revolution and then control the counter revolutions.
Yeah,
They have this
yeah.
bottom up, top down formula that they've always tended to use in different forms. And on the one hand, you have the Jesuits seeding this radical liberation theology on the one hand for this bottom up, let's fight the machine a la Marxist style of the proletariat rising. And then on the other hand, you've got the higher level Jesuits who are much more initiated, like Bergoglio, who are the ones advising the right wing pro Nazi governments that have been installed by Henry Kissinger and Schultz to then crack down on those very people who are trusting them,
Yeah.
thinking that, oh, I could trust my fellow Jesuit at the top. And Himmler was doing the same thing in Germany too, right? I was just reading about Hitler's, the SS, the Waffen SS had an inner Gnostic, satanic, I would say, core out
Oh,
of
yeah.
Wewelsburg Castle, and Himmler was at the head of this new Templar order that
Oh,
he
yeah. No, it was
oversaw,
insane. When
and he
when
was also modeling the Wewelsburg Castle structure around the Jesuits, which also trained him. So they were doing the same type of thing in the Nazi Germany regime, as well as afterwards too, when Alan Dulles was employing them the way Cynthia wrote so eloquently in her recent papers and book.
that's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, Hitler's like Spear of Destiny, all that stuff. You know that story, right?
yeah,
That's
yeah. The
just
spear that
crazy.
killed
Just
Jesus.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Parzival's The Grail mythologies, and
yeah,
yeah, Ravenscroft's book on it's unbelievable.
yeah.
And those are my roots. I got German Austrian roots, so I'm a messed up puppy. But anyways, no,
Matt
I'm
has
good.
also
No, I took a
Matt also
picture.
has German
I went to the
Austrian roots.
Habsburg Museum and I took a picture of the Spear of Destiny, and I'm like, I don't think it's actually. I think it's a fake. Where would I hide? I started to think, where would if Patton died, right? Patton dies strangely. He sends in his one of his guys to go get it out of Nuremberg Mountain, and but suddenly he dies. I'm like, what would the CIA do with the Spear of Destiny? Where would they hide it in plain sight? You know where my theory is? In the lawn, in the Pentagon.
In the lawn of the Pentagon?
Yeah, if you look from space, right, what do you
In the
see?
middle.
The middle. If
Really?
it's
That's where you think
true, if Hitler believed that this elixir, this right, that Charlemagne used, right, and Barbarossa, because the mythology, right, it could be used for good or evil, but because he inverted the energy of the spear and the swastika.
have you seen any evidence that it's in the middle of the Pentagon?
This is my theory, which is mine, which is mine. John Cleese.
It's possible.
Possible. I'm just winging it, man. Like I don't know.
No, there's definitely occult weird shit in the
It,
formation of the
it's just
the
so weird. I wouldn't put past them at all. But I guess I know you guys have to go soon. I was like focusing on what gives you hope? Like who are the characters we should actually, other than you two, we should be actually listening to because the rest of the thing is such a bad B movie. It's like, I don't trust anything. I don't trust, okay, Trump, he's a good actor and right. And to your point, you got JD who's working for Teal. Like I don't know. How do you think this is gonna play out? Like who, is something great gonna happen at the BRICS this week or
Cynthia, you wanna tackle that?
anyway, this is a fly
No,
ball. I don't know.
no,
Nope,
no, you
that's
know.
that's in your
No,
court.
I'm not going for that one.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm the optimistic guy. Well,
Well,
look,
I'm an optimist, but remember, I'm coming at it from a strategic prayer perspective.
yeah.
Like,
Um, well, look, for me, from a like, I guess you could say, geopolitical perspective, what I'm like, touching on what I was thinking about in my first remarks pertaining to the longer subtle waves of history, for good or for bad. You've got these more subtle but really powerful sets of ideas that shape the long run game, like the long game. And I
yeah,
think
the
that,
long game. Yeah.
when I'm looking at the quality of insight exhibited by the discourses that I read the transcripts of from the Chinese intelligentsia, from the people around Putin.
Putin. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you read the remarks of Glaziev and other advisors to Putin, and you're like, wow, that's a high quality of philosophical depth that I recognize as of
Yes.
the current that shapes the deeper movements of history for the
Yeah.
good. That's the
And
sort of thing.
and
This,
with the sense of they understand Operation Gladio. They understand the
oh
spirit
yeah,
of that, right?
oh yeah, it's
Yeah,
deeply. The
absolutely.
Chinese lost 10 million people.
Oh
In
yeah.
World
Like
War
I was
II,
in
the Russians
Manchuria. I
lost
was like,
28
what the
million
hell?
people. It's very visceral for them, the how real
Uh,
like the fascism was, and how it was never dealt with after the war.
right,
So
right,
they're
absolutely.
much more aware than we are in the West, who didn't
Yeah.
suffer nearly as much as they did. And again, they actually have, like, China has at least a 6,000 year culture
Yeah.
that is forming the decision making and the considerations of those geopolitical policymakers who are trying to navigate through this array of
Gordian
Gordian
knot. Yeah.
knots that
Yeah.
are being
Yeah.
thrown
Yeah.
at them. So, I'm quite optimistic and I think Cynthia would share that. I mean, you could jump in if you have any thoughts, but I think we're overall quite optimistic about the long game, and the fact that humanity currently has something that we've never seen before, as a convergence of different cultures with a common understanding of the enemy, its techniques,
Mhm.
and the higher principles of natural law, of which we could see a lot of policies, economic, geostrategic, being brought online, which are in alignment with those things that have been good, that have caused many American presidents to die. When I look at the policies of those presidents that died, I see the
Yeah.
principle activated today in Eurasia and amongst the discussions of the BRICS.
Like a Hamiltonian kind of maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
that's one aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as far as the local, our side of the Iron Curtain is concerned, I mean, I do think that Trump is a human who's uh compromised, but I do see him as a human with a conscience, working with humans who are not cyborg, transhumanists, who
Yeah.
thus can be
Yeah. Yeah.
organized. So to that degree that he's not totally captured by the beast, that's latched on, there could still be something that can bring the U.S. and bring the West into some harmonization of principle with that more sane part of the world. If he is totally captured, it's going to be a rougher ride.
It'll be a rough ride. So one
Yeah.
question, and I know Cynthia can answer this one. No, I don't think you want to, but how do you feel we have one needs to deal with the predisposition of these entities to be occultist, and your treatment of Edgar Allan Poe and Tesla, and I mean, this has been going on for a long time. So the question is, how do you deal with, I think about Freemasonry. I'm like, here's a big question. Uh, from my understanding of how, exorcism and deliverance prayer works, it's complicated because generally it's one person at a time. It takes a long time. The exorcising takes over a year now to get someone who even wants to be delivered from that oppression, right? To be free. But now we're dealing with systemic evils, like systemic strongholds. And what's the strategy for dealing with these systemic systems, right? In which the infiltration is so and these people are so like I used to, I used to pray for Dick Cheney, and I'm like, well, what's the point of that? Like he's given his life, like he must be able to go to sleep at night with a clean conscience because right? He's a sociopath or psychopath. So
He did have a heart attack.
he
Maybe
did have a
that's
heart. You're right. So I think that's the big question I keep asking my friends, like from a system-wide perspective, what is there kind of a strategy that makes sense other than shining a light like you're doing? It's like, well, these are all occultists, and they
Mhm.
whether you say Satan or you say all those other things.
Mhm. Well, so I think that, there are different phases of the fight, of a long fight. So there are
Hmm.
some things you can't address in the now,
Hmm.
and there are some things you must address in the now because it's an existential question.
Right, right. Good point.
So the whole thing about Trump that I'm the most positive about is that if he simply just doesn't go to war, we're
Yes.
okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Because everything, yeah, everything else is going to work itself out, whether he, succeeds or fails as a person. And obviously, it matters to Americans, but I don't see him doing too much in terms of a bad economic policy or anything like that compared to what has already been hitting Americans for
Yeah, yeah,
decades.
yeah.
But if he simply does not go to war, that is terrific. And I can just get behind just that, get the United States out of NATO, these kinds
Totally.
of things. In terms of this longer fight, which is the brainwashing that has happened from the elites that has, come down from like centuries and centuries, like this whole thing of you know, their interpretation of how you get power, just like Matt was saying, right? This like this will to power corruption, which is satanic at its core.
Hmm.
That's something obviously that is going to take some time. But this is the corruption of it tends to be the elite families that really pass this on. Whereas I would say the average person doesn't really have that. And even within our cultures, with our longer cultures, I mean, again, in the West, we have a very short cultural
Hmm.
identity, but even in areas where they have a much longer cultural identity, like in
Like
the
China.
like China, but even like, the Middle East, there,
Mm.
these sorts of areas, or Russia is younger, but still, they've existed for
About a
a
thousand
long time.
years. Yeah.
They have enough positive things within their cultural history that I see that there's a lot of positivity in even like these sorts of things. It's really the corruption of a certain kind of elitist thinking that crosses over everything. It's not like, oh, it's a one particular culture at this point that has that
Hmm.
problem. It's a problem with how you understand your what is responsibility when you have power. So this is a universal question. For the average person, thus, I feel that Greece is a good example of how when Greece was getting slammed economically, because economics actually has a huge factor for the average person, along with culture, but its economics is more massive than people realize. So when Greece was being hit economically, and they had, mass youth unemployment, of course, everyone is going to be much more cynical. They're going to be, disempowered, and this is the recipe for radicalization as well. Typically, when you had a certain resistance that was happening within the Greek government, Matt at the time too, he was like doing table organizing with the LaRouche organization. So he was talking to people a lot, on the street. And the Greeks were notorious for being very defeatist, like, why bother? Why do anything?
Yeah.
And then when the Greek government started to stand up to, the kind of IMF type policies and all of this, the Greeks totally changed like
Yeah.
that.
Well, I
And
know
they
that.
started to talk to Matt like, yeah,
You
you need to
mean
fight, you need to fight. And like they all of a sudden had a much, so I feel that
that's
people
interesting, right? That's
Yeah.
our
people will orient super quickly if they have
yeah.
positive leadership. Actually, that's something
That's a
Tavistock
very
was
good
studying.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, Tavistock was studying that if you have a competent leader, people will choose the competent leader. If you put an environment in, you have an environment where for whatever reason you don't have any competent leadership that is available, or at least is like you can recognize, they will choose pathological forms of leadership. That is something that Tavistock itself discovered as a kind of societal trend. Obviously, it's going to, vary
Mhm.
depending on the education level of a society, but that will often happen, and that's what we see today. Our leaders are like psychopaths. They're like literal psychopaths. If they were diagnosed by a
Yeah.
psychologist, they would be classified as a psychopath of whatever variant. So people will respond to competent leadership. That's another super positive. So for me, even though
Mm.
there's been always the problem of the mob mentality that can be weaponized, um, it's a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
They can also recognize a competent, positive
Yeah.
leadership. And at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants, is that. Most people don't want to have permanent warfare and
No.
scorched earth policy.
Exactly.
This is a radicalized ideology from an elitist education, and that's a longer term question. And that was the thing that, the fight between Plato and Aristotle is how we view these two world visions of, will to power versus natural law. Understanding that you were born into a universe that has preset laws that are good. They have a purpose. There's love, there's wisdom, and you can't override that.
That's right.
But these people are insane.
Even the AI told me that natural laws essentially do good, avoid evil. Thank you, Perplexity AI.
They, they
Right,
are
right before he gave me my benediction,
That's right for the benediction. Well, that's brilliant,
so yeah,
Cynthia. So you're talking
and
about
that's
like,
where I want to go in the long term is education. But right now we have like a very existential crisis in terms of the insanity to want to go to war. And so obviously, we're putting our resources into that, but that's not the most important
no,
thing in terms of the long game.
most of my Ukrainian friends don't want to see, every young man slaughtered in some insane blood sacrifice in a stupid, unnecessary war. Um,
Mhm.
so you're, so Matt, were you talking to Varoufakis in Greece? Like when,
I never spoke to him, but that was the period with Saritsa and Varoufakis' small moment in the sun,
yeah,
where there
yeah,
was a lot of hope that there was going to be some fight back, and yeah, it was transformative. Like
it
because I was
really
doing
was. Yeah.
daily organizing for 8 hours a day, and it was like it was about as quick as I'd seen when Obama was first elected and I was organizing in LA at the time in 2008, and I was there for 6 months, and the policy of that branch of the LaRouche organization was to never go to Compton because it was just too dangerous, gangland, dangerous. And yet, as soon as Obama was elected, for about a month, all of a sudden it was safe to go to Compton. Young men were like walking around, they pulled up their pants. There was like dignity, like it was like the spiritual alchemy that just like because there was like this ground for hope.
Oh yeah,
Like that
no.
was that it when people realized, especially the black community realized that it was all based on lies, it got even worse. Because I mean that's the best way to really do somebody's spiritual damage is give them hope that they
Oh,
invest their identities in and then break it. Th-
yeah.
that that is a that is
I
torture.
really feel for Candace right now, you know?
Candace Homan.
Yeah, it's like poor woman. Just like I was how I was just like
Well, she rolled with the punches pretty well, all things considered.
I really
Um,
appreciate. Yeah. Anyways, no, it's important, and of course, then the Varoufakis voices get quickly jumped on and
yeah, he
called
was
malign,
purged in 2 seconds, right?
totally
But the
purged.
point is, but in principle, I think that that's the point to really take as a lesson. Not that good people are lying to you or that they'll get purged. It's that the society resonates to natural human goodness and reason,
Yeah.
and we're much more quick as a society to just transform in accordance with the good than the amount of effort that the oligarchy has to put in to get us to normalize perversity
Right.
and mediocrity. That's so much more energy intensive and unnatural. So there's that to just be aware as a social mechanism that we have to keep in mind. Things could transform for the good in quicker ways than we often realize possible.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh,
And I think that's brilliant. That's why I applaud both of you. I listen to you like regularly, more regularly than my wife even. Just kidding.
oh, no, oh, no,
That's,
don't.
I don't know about that, but no, because your points like you're bringing forth reason with the least amount of emotion. You're very deductive and you're compassionate. You're bringing, right? You're affirming basically that gospel of love that I think we all feel uh, naturally inclined towards. And so, thank you for all you're doing. I don't know how you make money at it, but it's like,
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? But it's not about the money. It's
But
we
people are thankful as well, and they actually are being very supportive. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
good too. We're surprised ourselves sometimes, but yeah, there's a lot of love.
there is a lot of love.
Um,
Yeah,
and
no,
it's increasing. So I think that people are increasingly getting fed up with these narratives that are trying to radicalize or divide people. It's very tiring, to constantly try to categorize who you're speaking to with these types of labels rather than just using your own mind and being able to have a dialogue with someone that you might not even agree with everything that they're saying, but the whole point is that you have to have a certain amount of diversity in this world, and not all forms of things that are not you are threats to you. It's absolutely insane to think that that's a kind of world
no,
that you can build.
it's insane. I mean, going to China the first time in 2003 and hearing the words win, 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 like Hu Jintao, and like, what? Shao Kang, like, when did anyone, like, what? They've asked a Westerner to come and help them on Shao Kang, which is well being. Like, I come back home like, ceases. When are you gonna call me? Like, please interview me. And they did eventually. They called me, but that was a long time later. But I thought the West has no idea about that China is basically pioneering this well-being economy that I'm working on, right? And I'm
Hmm.
like, wow, the untold story, and we've just demonized China. It's like it's ridiculous.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mark.
Well,
I
thank you so
appreciate
much.
taking this having this little chat with us. This is always fun, and hopefully the viewers get something out of it too.